Hey everyone, I'm Jacob Castro and welcome to another plant guide here on Jacob's Aquarium. So today in this plant guide we'll be discussing Bucephalandra and everything you need to know on how to grow it successfully in your aquarium. Let me just start off by saying that I'm glad I did not buy into this plant early on. When it first was introduced to the hobby, it was insanely expensive, and everybody was going crazy for this plant. Once it gained a little bit of popularity, businesses and hobbyists and everybody pretty much in this industry started to take notice, and everybody started snatching them up and propagating themselves, and it's really quite exploded in this hobby. But I will say that I think it's kind of, the popularity of Bucephalandra is kind of declining a little bit. And I think it's just because that initial rush of like, oh, look at this new amazing plant from Borneo, it's so cool, it's tiny, it grows really nice, I think that shock and that excitement is kind of, dwindling away. So naturally now prices have begun to drop. They're not so expensive anymore. I remember when they first came out on the scene, I was seeing Bucephalandra offered for sale at ridiculous prices, like $50 per rhizome, $100 per rhizome. It was crazy, But now you can get a single rhizome Bucephalandra plant on my website, for example, for $4.99. So they're relatively affordable now. They're slightly more expensive than your average aquarium plant, but I mean, for $5, you really can't beat it. All right, now in regards to color, there's many different colors to choose from, and the only thing I will say, for those of you that like really colorful plants, is that don't expect the color variations between Bucephalandra to be so dramatic. While some are sold as like red Bucephalandra or purple or scarlet red or something like that, they're not going to be like super red. They're not going to be super purple. They'll just have these really subtle, variations between them, So typically, most Bucephalandra plants that I've seen, they're either green or they're either like a dark brownish color, If you're getting one that's being sold as like a more colorful plant, something that's sold as like a red species of Bucephalandra, it's more of like a dark velvet red. It's nothing that's really going to stand out, and it's nothing that's really bright and really colorful, So when you buy Bucephalandra, don't expect, to just have spectacular colors in your aquarium when you grow this plant, because they're not so bright and enthusiastic, if that's the right word. They're just plants that have really subtle color variations between them. As far as growth rate goes, they are one of the more slow growing plants. I would say they're equivalent to the growth rate of a Nubius plant. You'll probably, in the right conditions, in the ideal conditions, which would be CO2, nutrients in your aquarium water, good lighting, as far as things like that go, if they're in that ideal environment, you'll probably get a new leaf out of this plant, I would say every week and a half. So it's really not a fast growing plant, but it's still one of those plants that has a decent growth rate, and within a span of 6 months you should get a nice big either bush or carpet of this stuff, depending on how you're growing it. Now, as far as what this plant needs to grow, I've found that it's a little tricky. It really is. I don't know if you guys have had similar experiences, but whenever I've tried to grow this plant in substrate, it dies. It just melts away completely. But any Bucephalandra plant that I grow, tied to a piece of driftwood or tied to a rock or something, it absolutely thrives. So I'm not like, I haven't dug deep into this. I haven't investigated this. I'm not a scientist, but and I'm not sure if you guys have had the same experiences as well. But I do know that in the wild, in Borneo, where this plant is said to have originated from, this plant is mainly found growing either immersed or completely out of water attached to rocks. It's not really found growing in substrate, you know, dirt, whatever, you know. So I would say that, you know, to eliminate the risk of this plant dying, because some of these plants are pretty pricey, I would say only grow this plant attached to driftwood or rocks. In other words, don't put this plant in substrate. And I know some of you may be thinking that, well, maybe my plant died because I covered the rhizome. You know, something you're not supposed to do with rhizome plants because it kills them. But I'll say with 100% without a doubt, I didn't do that. So, and I've experienced this issue of Bucephalandra dying when it's grown in substrate many times with multiple varieties. So I would say for the best possible chances and the best possible chances of success growing this plant, I would say grow it not in substrate but attached to driftwood or rocks, which is very similar to how it grows in the wild, except, you know, you're not growing this plant immersed or completely out of water. You're growing it, you know, submerged. But they still grow submerged. Just as far as I believe, they don't really like substrate at all. Now, as far as nutrients and lighting and things like that, I've found that Bucephalandra can grow in many different varieties of lighting conditions. I've grown it in a low light tank, a medium light tank, and a high light tank in my ADA 75P with my Castro A360X. Super bright light, and it's grown beautifully. So I would say as far as lighting goes, this plant is very versatile. So it's not one of those plants that you have to really worry about when you grow it in your tank about, like, oh, is it getting enough light? It should be fine no matter where you grow it. Just give it a little bit of light and it should grow just fine. I will say, however, that the amount of light you give it does affect its growth rate, so which is typical with most plants, you know. So if you're not giving it a lot of light, don't expect to have, you know, really decent growth rate. Expect to have very minimal, you know, growth with it. It'll definitely take you a lot longer growing this plant in low light to get a lot of it than it would if you were growing it in a high light environment, for sure. As far as nutrients and CO2 goes, I always recommend nutrients with every planted aquarium. You know, I know there are some people that say, oh, well, this plant will grow just fine, you know, with the nutrients that your fish produce, you know. But I always recommend some type of nutrients, whether it's in the substrate or liquid nutrients, so definitely supply that to this plant. As far as CO2 goes, I would say it's not recommended, but it definitely does boost the growth rate of this plant. And, you know, considering that this plant already grows very slowly, if you can get more growth out of it in a shorter amount of time, you know, CO2 is definitely worth it. So it's not required, but it definitely helps. And lastly, as far as propagation, this plant is super easy to propagate. I would just say, you know, let it grow to a decent size. Don't propagate it when it's so short and so, you know, young as a plant. Propagate it once it's really had some time to grow. That way, if, you know, the part where you cut it begins to rot or melt away, it doesn't, you know, kill the whole plant because there's so much of it. Which I say that because I've seen that happen. I've literally cut a rhizome in half on a plant that was this big, and unfortunately the part that I cut just completely died. So, but I really believe if that plant was a little bit bigger, it probably would have been a little bit stronger and probably would have survived the cutting propagation. So I would say if you're going to propagate this plant, just, you know, let it grow a little bit first. But as far as propagating it, it's very simple. You can just cut a piece of the rhizome off, which, for those of you that don't know, the rhizome is that little cylindrical tube-like structure where the plant's leaves and roots come out of. So if you cut that off of a bigger mother plant and tie that to a rock or piece of driftwood, it'll grow a whole whole nother thing of Bucephalandra. You know, so it's a super easy plant to propagate. But like I said, just make sure that it's kind of grown out a little bit before you start chopping it up. Alright, so thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Don't forget, if you would like to buy any Bucephalandra plants that we talked about in this video or I've shown in this video, visit jacobsaquarium.com. I have many to choose from, all at very affordable prices. The most affordable on the internet, as a matter of fact. I encourage you guys to check out other sellers before you buy from me, because you will see time and time again that my prices cannot be beat. The website is jacobsaquarium.com. It says it right here on my shirt, except the .com. Thank you guys so much for watching, really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to check me out on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All my social media links will be in the description below. I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for watching and liking and subscribing. I really appreciate it. We're almost to 50,000 subscribers. Never thought I'd see this day. So keep those likes and subscriptions coming. I really appreciate it. Let's reach 50,000 so I can post all about it on my social media pages and explode with happiness once I reach that milestone. Thank you guys so much for watching. Once again, really appreciate it. Have fun with your tanks, and I'll see you next time.